In a New Republic article titled "Hillary's Nightmare: A Democratic Party That realizes its sole lies with Elizabeth Warren," Noam Scheiber writes this about a possible Hillary Clinton challenger. Quote, "In addition to being strongly identified with the party's populist wing, any candidate who challenged Clinton would need several key assets. The candidate would almost certainly have to be a woman, given Democrats' desire to make history again. She would have to amass huge piles of money with relatively little effort. Above all, she would have to awaken in Democratic voters an almost evangelical passion. As it happens, there is precisely such a person. Her name is Elizabeth Warren." Before her election to the Senate, Elizabeth Warren, like Barack Obama in 2004, was given a primetime speaking slot at the 2012 Democratic National Convention, where she delivered a high-profile populist speech.
Tell me a little bit about the last few times you've taken the biggest financial institutions on Wall Street all the way to a trial. Anybody? I'm really concerned that too big to fail has become too big for trial. That just seems wrong to me. I never thought I'd run for the Senate, and I sure never dreamed that I'd be the warm-up act for President Bill Clinton. He's an amazing man who had the good sense to marry one of the coolest women on this planet.
According to our plan, our little plan here, Ari Melber, we were actually going to show the Democratic Convention speech and then the little cute script thing, as you've seen done here, that would introduce the committee scene there. But Noam Scheiber, let's get to your very important article, which has finally introduced an element of suspense into the 2016 nominating process for the Democratic nomination. Let's hear your case about the Elizabeth Warren threat.
Well, look, I mean, you alluded to part of it, but there's a sort of structural case to make for it, and that is since 2008, since the last time there was an open Democratic primary, the party has really become much more populist. I mean, if you look at numbers about Democratic attitudes towards large corporations and the power that large corporations have, if you look at their views toward big banks and Wall Street in particular, they've become vastly more populist over the last 5 years, and presumably that trend will continue. We see periodic outbursts of it. Very difficult to conclude that that's not where the heart and soul of the party lies today. Hillary Clinton is just not there. Going back to the early 90s when her husband first ran for president, she's had long-standing relationships with sort of new Democrat types who have either come from Wall Street or have long ago made their peace with Wall Street and believe it deserves a sort of central role in economic policy making. So she is in some sense constrained both for those reasons and because she's likely to raise tens of millions of dollars from Wall Street interests, from large corporations. It's going to be difficult. There are limits to the degree that she can move left in this sort of populist left, which just puts her out of step with where rank-and-file Democrats are today. So there is sort of a structural reason for someone to challenge Hillary from the left. All it needs is a vehicle, and suddenly we have this vehicle in the human form of a very charismatic, very popular Democratic senator from Massachusetts.
Ari, Noam's article points out the importance of fundraising ability in a challenger. And when I go back to 2007, as soon as I saw that Barack Obama was raising the same amount, and in some cases more money than Hillary Clinton, I thought then Hillary Clinton is going to lose, because her polling number was up in the 40s, and he was about 20 points behind, but her polling number looked to me like a ceiling, and he had enough money to be competitive. If Elizabeth Warren were to run, if she were to have parity in fundraising as Barack Obama did, that would be a real race.
I think so, and that goes to Noam's structural point, right, which is that Barack Obama had this grassroots army, and so his low-dollar fundraising freed him up both in time, which is important as a candidate, and one could argue in policy boundaries, because he wasn't as beholden, although he did raise plenty of money from Wall Street. It wasn't his primary piggy bank. The other piece of this, though, I think, is what kind of primary you think you're going to have. There are a lot of primaries that are about personality. You were just talking about whether Chris Christie can bully his way around the country and get people excited just by the way he is. Hillary has a great personality that a lot of people are attracted to. But sometimes primaries are about bigger things. 2007, 2008 was also chiefly about litigating a dispute over the Iraq War and how many Democrats went along with the war.
Who was right, who was wrong.
Yes, and Barack Obama's credibility on that, combined with his unique candidacy, is what separated him. I don't think, with all due respect to how interesting Barack Obama's life story was, I think if he had been a pro-war and pro-Wall Street guy, it would have been a different primary. And so that goes to whether this hangover now goes to populism. And the last point I'll make on that Noam's article gestures at, but didn't totally embrace, is in the Tea Party, they've got a lot of grassroots energy, and it is, as rambunctious as it is, it's within the GOP. Occupy and a lot of the populist economic uprising had energy, but never found a foothold within the Democratic Party thus far.
And Noam, there are plenty of issues we haven't really heard Elizabeth Warren on that you could find space, presumably, to the left of Hillary Clinton, like the use of drone warfare in its particulars, some of the NSA overreach issues that have been developed this year. Do you see something in there that's as strong as that difference that we had in 2008 between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton on the Iraq War?
I don't. I mean, there's clearly energy around this issue, and you can imagine, and you don't even have to imagine, you can remember when a Republican president was presiding over these policies, there was a lot of outrage among Democrats and on the left over those policies. Obviously, it's been repressed a bit given that it's now a Democratic president. So I think there's a lot of energy around that. I still think the economic issues will loom larger. I think they go, what's interesting about Iraq in 2008, and I think this is where there is a real analogy in 2016 potentially, is it was partly about policy, but it was also partly about just kind of being a proxy for all the queasiness that people had with the Clintons. They sort of tilt with the wind, and they do what seems sort of politically convenient. I mean, you remember back to Bill Clinton's famous quote about the Iraq War in 1992. I don't even remember, it was so convoluted. If he had been there, he would have probably voted, he wanted to vote against it, but if he'd been there, he'd have voted for it. So I think there was a lot of that, these sort of bad memories that the Iraq vote dredged up for Hillary. And I think the Wall Street populist issue does the same. There's a lot of Democrats who are just queasy with the way that the Clintons have surrounded themselves with large corporate interests, investment bankers, the Robert Rubin wing of the party, and so it's kind of a cultural issue and a characterological issue in addition to just a policy issue.
Ari, quickly before we go, Republican strategist Mike Murphy in 2007 said he thought Obama had a real chance. Today, Mike Murphy tweeted, "I think it's entirely possible that Elizabeth Warren can upset HRC for the Dem nomination. Only one who could beat her." So the theme is developing.
I think the theme's there. I mean, I think what Noam did was pick up on something that is out there, as I mentioned, whether that's Occupy grassroots, frustration over inequality. When people talk about 1%, all of that is a policy conversation that's important. The fact that it's a very respectable woman with a great track record goes to the idea that she would be more positioned than a lot of other people.
Ari Melber and Noam Scheiber, thank you both for joining me tonight.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thanks for having me.